the remains of Tim Treadwell, 46, a self-proclaimed eco-warrior and photographer, along with girlfriend Amy Huguenard, 37, a physician's assistant, both of Malibu, California, were found Monday, October 6, 2003, in Katmai USG's topo map of Kaflia Bay, Alaska, area of Moling National Park and Preserve on the Alaska Peninsula, after the air taxi pilot Willie Fulton, who had flown in to pick the couple up near Kaflia Bay, contacted the National Park Service and Alaska State Troopers to report that a brown bear was sitting on top of what appeared to be human remains near the camp. For 13 summers, Timothy Treadwell fled California for the wilds of Alaska, where he set his camp among some of the largest and most numerous brown bears left in North America. Treadwell gained national celebrity status after his appearance February 20, 2001, on CBS's David Letterman show, promoting his 1997 book, Among Grizzlies Living with Wild Bears in Alaska, along with his close-up photographs and video footage, often showing him within arm's reach of large brown bears or creeping on all fours towards a sow and her 3 cubs, talking in a soft, childlike, sing-song voice. The early years. Tim Treadwell was born in New York in 1957 as Timothy Dexter, the third of 5 children. According to Tim, as a teenager, his home life disintegrated, often getting stinking drunk and once smashed up the family's car. After barely graduating high school, Tim left for Southern California and ended up in Long Beach. Soon after he arrived, he began working in restaurants while attending college on a swimming scholarship. After the college party life took over his life and losing his scholarship, Tim began auditioning for parts in various sitcoms, changing his name to Treadwell from his mother's side of the family. According to his book, Among Grizzlies, during this period he continued to indulge in alcohol and drugs and finally overdosed on heroin and cocaine in the late 1980s and was rescued by a Vietnam vet named Terry, whom he had become close to. After he was discharged from the hospital, Tim decided to travel to Alaska and watch bears at the urging of Terry. His early attempts at camping were almost comical. In his journal, he wrote that he was often cold, hungry and tormented by insects, and that the first time he saw a grizzly, it ran away. Tim later said he was sad that any bear would find him a threat. Treadwell, 1997. Mark Emery, a wildlife filmmaker and outdoor guide, first saw Treadwell from the air in the early 1990s. Emery was on a charter flight over Hallow Bay in Katmai National Park with a film crew from National Geographic when they spotted a guy on the ground desperately waving his arms. Tim said he was learning to be around bears, but that he wanted to get out of there right away because the bears had been in his camp. I took a picture of him holding a water jug that was crushed by a bear. Emery, 2003. Emery goes on to say that Tim was camping near the coast and was nearly out of water, although a freshwater stream was nearby. At Treadwell's request, the film crew contacted a charter service to pick him up. Emery, 2003. Back in California during the winter months, Tim worked as a bartender and stayed sober. With a previous girlfriend, Jewel Palovac, he wrote his 1997 book, Among Grizzlies Living with Wild Bears in Alaska. Together they began Grizzly People, a nonprofit group devoted to educating people, especially children, about bears, and as a way to fund his travels to Alaska. Almost from the start, National Park Service officials worried about Tim's behavior. According to Park Service records in 1998, Treadwell was issued a citation by park rangers for storing an ice chest filled with food in his tent. On another occasion, he was ordered by park rangers to remove a prohibited portable generator. A total of 6 park violations or complaints from 1994 to 2003, including guiding tourists without a license, camping in the same area longer than the 5-day limit, improper food storage, wildlife harassment, use of a portable generator, and muisc. Altercations with visitors and licensed guides. Treadwell also frustrated park rangers because he refused to carry bear spray. Deb Liggett, superintendent of Katmai National Park, became sufficiently concerned about Treadwell that she met him for coffee in Anchorage several years prior to his death. I told him that if we had any more violations from him, we would petition the U.S. magistrate to ban him from the park. Liggett applauded the fact that Treadwell was winning fans for the Bears and was being more careful to warn people not to attempt what he did, but she and other park officials were afraid that one swipe of a paw would undo all that and result in a frenzy of stories about fearsome people-eating grizzlies. Amy Huguenard apparently did not share the same concern. A physician's assistant in Aurora, Colorado, Amy first fell in love with Treadwell's book and eventually its author. Huguenard quit her job on Jan. 31, 2003, and moved to Malibu, where she was to start a new job after she and Tim returned for the winter. The couple had spent parts of the 3 previous summers together in Alaska. On September 29, 2003, Tim and Amy once again are transported to Kaflia Lake by Willie Fulton. The couple wanted one more chance to be with the Bears before winter set in. 8 days later, they are discovered dead. Discovery and investigation. As scheduled, at 2:00 p.m. on Monday, October 6, 2003, air taxi pilot Willie Fulton from Andrew Airways arrives at Kaflia Lake to transport Tim and Amy out of the area for the year and is approached by a large brown bear. Willie states it was rainy and foggy out that morning. After landing, Willie believes that he sees Tim shaking out a tarp and yells for the couple but receives no response. He decides to hike up the path from the beach and through the thick alder brush towards the camp after he notices a little bit of movement. When he is about 3/4 way up the hill, he senses that something just didn't feel right. Something seemed strange, hollering with no answer. Willie then states that he turned around and headed back down the path through the thick alders at a pretty good clip. And just as he gets to the plain, he turns and spots a pretty nasty-looking bear that he had seen on earlier flights, sneaking slowly down the trail with its head down. Just the meanest-looking thing. Willie then takes off and flies over the campsite 15 to 20 times in an attempt to chase the bear away, and sees what appears to be the same bear feeding from a human rib cage, but each time he flies over the camp, the bear begins to feed even faster. Incident diagram, courtesy National Park Service. Katmai Park Ranger Joel Ellis received the call from Andrew Airways at 1:35 p.m. Ranger Ellis then requests that Willie Fulton be contacted by radio and asks that he remain nearby if he could do so safely. Willie then lands again about 1 mile west of the camp on the western shore of the lake. At 3:20 p.m., Ranger Ellis joins up with 2 other park rangers at the airport and depart in a Park Service Cessna 206 with Ranger Pilot A. Gilliland at the controls and Ranger D. Dalrymple in the back seat. Ranger Ellis also has Park Dispatch report the incident to King Salmon State Troopers as well as Alaska Fish and Game, requesting that troopers meet the park rescue team at Kaflia Lake near Tim and Amy's camp. At 4:26 p.m., the team arrive at the lake, and Ranger Ellis conducts a quick interview with Willie Fulton. Willie states that he could not be 100% sure, but was confident that something was wrong. Willie advises the Rangers that there is only room for 1 plane to park near the camp and climbs into the Park Service Cessna for the quick taxi to the South Shore. As they approach the area, Ranger Pilot Gilliland spots a large adult bear near the top of the hill, where the campsite is supposedly located. After exiting the plane, the 4 begin slowly hiking up the path from the lake, yelling as they walk to help locate any surviving victims and to alert any nearby bears of their presence. Ranger Ellis states that the visibility was poor with a heavy growth of bushes and tall grass. The camp was located on top of a ridge and out of our sight. We had radio contact with Alaska State Troopers Hill and Jones, who were forced to park their plane 300 meters away and had to hike through the thick brush. So we elected to wait at the base of the hill until Troopers Hill and Jones could catch up. Ranger Ellis was standing with Ranger Gilliland and Willie Fulton to his left. Ranger Dalrymple was slightly ahead of Gilliland when Gilliland suddenly yells, "Bear!" while pointing to the right. Ranger Ellis states that he turned and saw an adult bear moving toward the group about 20 feet away. All 4 begin yelling in hopes that the bear would see them and move away. Ranger Ellis then states that he perceived that the bear was well aware of their presence and was stalking them. Ranger Ellis, armed with a .40 cal handgun, begins to fire at about the same time Rangers Gilliland and Dalrymple, who were each armed with 12-gauge shotguns loaded with slugs, also begin to shoot at the bear. Ranger Ellis fires 11 times, while Rangers Gilliland and Dalrymple each fire 5 times, dropping the bear 12 feet away. "That was cutting it thin," stated Ellis. After about 10 seconds, the bear dies, and Willie Fulton then reportedly says, "I want to look that bear in the eyes," and states that he is sure that this was the bear that chased him back to his plane earlier. Human remains were then found buried by a bear near the campsite, which was in a brushy area with poor visibility. 2 tents were discovered, one for gear and the main tent used for sleeping. Both were collapsed and torn. However, there was no evidence that the bear had pulled the victims from the main tent. In front of this main tent was a large mound of mud, grass, and sticks, 5 feet long, 4 foot wide, and 3 feet high. After moving a clump of dirt, Ranger Ellis later recalled seeing fingers and an arm protruding from the pile. Food was found in the camp, secured in 4 or 5 metal bear-proof canisters, as well as open snack food found untouched inside the sleeping tent. Both Tim and Amy's shoes were also found neatly still in place at the entrance to the main tent. Rangers Ellis and Dalrymple then hike back down the path to retrieve cameras from the plane. Ranger Gilliland states that he was standing at the top of the knoll about 10 feet from the mound containing Amy, looking around when he spots a large bear about 15 feet away walking up the same trail they had just hiked up, and the same trail that Rangers Ellis and Dalrymple had just walked down. After yelling "bear," the 2 troopers who had arrived at this point, as well as Willie Fulton, begin yelling at the bear to get out. The bear hesitates for about 2 seconds before turning and walking back down the trail to the lake. Meanwhile, Rangers Dalrymple and Ellis, having just reached the plane and out of earshot of the activity unfolding back at camp, spot a large adult bear moving down the trail from the camp. The 2 climb onto the plane's float and yell as the bear continues to move away. Because the bear did not appear to be acting aggressively, the Rangers allowed it to move off. Investigators combing the nearby area around the campsite discover what was left of Timothy Treadwell. His head connected to a small piece of spine and what has been described as a frozen grimace on his face. His right arm and hand laying nearby with his wristwatch still attached. Meanwhile, searchers excavating the bear's cache back in camp discover Amy Huguenard, whose arm and fingers had been exposed to the daylight when investigators first entered the camp, appearing as though she were peacefully asleep, except that her body, like Tim's, had been mostly eaten by the bear. Later, as the helicopter was being loaded, a second smaller bear, approximately 3 years old, seemed to be stalking the Rangers, and it was shot and killed as well. Ranger Ellis states that he saw a bear about 30 feet away. Ranger Gilliland fires a warning shot into the air, however the bear did not react. This bear was intermittently visible as it moved through the brush and tall grass. We were yelling, and the bear was looking right at us. As the bear continued to move towards the group ranger, Ellis fires a shotgun, while Trooper Hill and Ranger Gilliland also begin firing at the bear. The bear dropped but continued to move. Ranger Gilliland moved in and fired a final shot, killing the bear, states Ellis. Video and still camera equipment, also found at the site, were later analyzed by Alaska State Troopers, where it was discovered that the last remaining 6 minutes of videotape, which was found still in the camera bag, had captured the sounds of the attack. The first sounds from the tape are from Amy. She sounds surprised and asks if it's still out there. Apparently, either Tim had asked Amy to turn the camera on, or Amy just turned it on out of reflex. I don't believe this latter scenario took place for 1 minute, which I will discuss in detail below. At any rate, the attack was in progress when the camera was turned on, The next voice is from Timothy as he screams, "Get out here! I'm getting killed out here!" Tim was wearing a remote microphone on his coveralls. The sound of a tent zipper is then heard and the tent flap opening. Amy is heard screaming over the background sounds of rain hitting the tent, the wind and other storm sounds all mixed in with the bear, and Tim fighting to play dead. Seconds pass before Amy yells again to play dead. Not surprisingly, with Amy yelling and screaming nearby, this seems to work and the bear breaks off the attack. More on this below. A short conversation ensues as Amy and Tim try and determine if the bear is really gone. Being trained as a physician's assistant, it is believed that Amy made her way to Tim, and from the sounds caught on tape, the bear returns and Amy is forced to back off. Tim then is clearly heard screaming that playing dead isn't working and begs her to hit the bear. The sound of rain hitting the tent, along with wind, muffle the sounds at this point. However, Amy is clearly heard yelling to fight back. She is then heard screaming, "Stop! Go away!" or possibly run away. As the sound of a frying pan is used to beat the top of the bear's head and the sound of Tim moaning. It is believed that at this point in the attack, the bear let go of Tim's head, which the bear had in its mouth, and grabbed him somewhere in the upper leg area. The sound of Amy screaming very loudly, as Tim is clearly heard over the sounds of the storm, saying, "Amy, get away, go away." Tim knew he was going to die at this point and wanted to save Amy from the same fate. Amy did not go away. The audio portion of this videotape lasts roughly 6 minutes. During this period, Tim's cries and pleadings can be heard for 2/3 of that time. He did not die quickly, unlike some traumatic death victims who were lucky enough to drift off into a shock-induced dream state. Tim was obviously very aware and struggling desperately to survive during the last moments of his life. Unlike what is portrayed in the movies, the bear is nearly silent. Only low growls and periodic grunts are heard, which only adds to the horror of the scene. Sounds of the bear dragging Tim off, and the fading sounds of his screams indicate that Tim is being pulled and dragged into the brush and away from camp. As the tape comes to an end, the sounds of Amy's high-pitched screams rise to a new level, much like what has been described as the sound of a predator call used by hunters to produce the distress cries of a small wounded animal, which often attracts bears. Biologist Larry Van Dale, for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, theorizes that Amy's screams may have prompted the bear to return and kill her. We can only envision the horror of what Amy had witnessed and heard. Hysterical and paralyzed with fear, standing just outside of the tent until the bear returned and attacked her. On Friday, October 8, 2003, 2 days after investigators first arrived and killed the 2 bears, a necropsy of the larger bear was conducted at the scene by biologist Larry Van Dale, where it was learned the stomach and digestive tract contained human remains and torn pieces of clothing. 4 garbage bags containing human remains were removed and flown out by helicopter. The smaller, younger bear had been eaten by other bears before the multi-agency team could return, and only the head remained, so no determination could be made as to whether this young bear played any part in the deaths or the consumption of the victims.